Namaskar and welcome to this exciting show with a very famous author and a very good friend of mine. He's going to scientifically present the reasoning behind the difference between different types of dating based on methodologies adopted by different groups. And at Sattology, we appreciate every one of them because everyone is trying to do their own research and in a scientific manner. So, so let us hear and invite Shri Nilesh Oak ji. Nilesh Nilkant Oak. Namaskar, Hare Krishna and welcome.
Namaskar, Hare Krishna, Aditya ji.
So this is an exciting time in the history. Ever since 2014 and then 2016 Trump, now more and more silent majority is speaking up. More and more are talking about the real issues that face. And the biggest issue is the identity crisis. And Hindus have the maximum identity crisis because number one, they are the most intelligent. Sorry for people who, I'm not biased in any way, but generally the cultural intellectual capacity is very high based on the language and other things and mathematics and other things. And the secondly, therefore the suppression of history of Vedic culture, Sanatan culture has been the most severe, and it has been most strongly felt by the oppressed. And I would call Hindus as oppressed by the British, and the Islamists, and the communists, and the leftists. Like practically every single political group has attacked Hindus. So you have presented two shows where you did the dating on two different aspects, and today we want to go deeper behind the methodology, and also we want to the yuga calculation of Treta Yuga, Sat Yuga, Dwapar Yuga. That I want to delve deep into that, and you are an expert. I don't think you need any preparation there.
All right. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Go ahead. Yeah. So, no, thank you very much. So you mentioned there is this individual groups coming up and discussing, their identity issue. You can also relate that to every nation. The national spirits are up everywhere. I mean, Brexit, we know in UK, we know in America. I mean, one of the reasons President Trump came to power was also where many people felt that, America was kind of losing its own character, or it was taken for granted by many. That was part of the reason. And if you think of the India or the Sanatan Vedic culture, then that has been taken for granted, I would say, just from the colonialist perspective, at least for like 300, 400 years. Okay. And then if you go to Islam, that will go longer. But in case of Islam, it wasn't so much taken for granted, because what they did was right in the face. They just came, burnt libraries, destroyed things, and put the jizya on those people who were non-Muslim, and they just went on. In case of colonialism, what happened is they did it especially United Kingdom, the Britain, they did it in a very polished manner by just changing the methodologies, changing the education system, changing the definitions of what history is, and changing the narrative completely. Where I would say the Indian folks right now, if you, for example, like my subject, if you tell them that Mahabharata, Ramayana, that they can be dated using the internal evidence, first thing, they will not, many people, not all, many people will not believe that that's possible, number one. And the second, they will start questioning the methodology. And I'll talk to methodology, in a minute, but back to you.
No, you made a very good starting comment there, and this is exactly the reason the sophistication was not tolerated by many Western, I call them faith-based colonialists, because they could not tolerate the sophistication of the Indian culture, Indian history, and also even the calculation of dates. So now coming back to our core topic, and I think it's your core strength. You have many other strengths also, but for this program, I'm just saying that one. What you have done in calculation of yoga, and we have spoken to so many people. It's the most confusing topic for many intelligent brains.
Right. Okay, so let's start with the most popular and most popular and almost like most the definition for to which most people are attached to. Let's begin with that and let's understand its origin. Okay, it's a very precise mathematical number and it has a purpose. Unfortunately, it is misunderstood. But let's begin with that. So, for example, if you ask a randomly selected individual, let's say, somewhat educated or even not educated, and ask him or her, all right, how long is the duration of the Kali Yuga? Okay, so there are being the four yugas, the Kruta or the Satya Yuga, then Treta Yuga, then Dwapar and Kali. And invariably you will get the answer, uh, and they do a very good job of answering that correctly in the sense of what is the belief. Okay, is 432,000 years,
That's
they
right.
will say. And then if you ask them the second question again, they will give a very, when I say correct, they will give a very repetitive and reproducible answer. So if you randomly ask 10 people, more than likely you'll get the same answer, but it's not a correct answer. But let's go with what is understood today. So 432,000 is the timing of Kali Yuga. And if you said, okay, which yuga we are in today, you will get the answer, we are in Kali Yuga. And if you ask the next question, how many years have passed since the Kali Yuga began, you'll get approximately 5,000 years.
That's right.
Okay. Before we, right? Would you agree? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, before even we get into how these numbers came into being, the basic number 432,000 is very important. Now, what they say, the ratio of Kali Yuga to Satya Yuga all the way is 1:2:3:4. So Dwapar Yuga is a twice that of Kali Yuga, therefore 864,000 years, 432,000 times 2. And Treta is 3 times and Satya Yuga is a 4 times. But where does this number 432,000 comes from? If you go to Surya Siddhanta or if you go to Arya Bhattiya, which are purely astronomy texts, nothing to do with astrology, nothing to do with the Falajyotisha, purely astronomy text which tells you the positions of the planets, how to estimate, calculate the position of an individual planet, moon, sun, etc. What they did, what the ancient Indian astronomers did, is because every planet has a fractional time that it takes to go through the whole rotation, like the orbital period. Now they didn't want the error to accumulate, so what they did is they very precisely had measured the orbital period of each planet, moon, sun, everything. And what they did is they turned that into, like, lowest common denominator type mathematically. They kept on increasing until the number came out to so big number that uh, the orbital periods in that yuga, so they called this 432,000 years as one yuga. They didn't call it Kali Yuga, they just called it a yuga. And they said in that yuga they can now talk about, essentially, the sun would make 432,000 rotations around the earth, as of course seen from the earth. So that is that reference point. And in that language, now they started talking about how many rotations moon would make, how many rotations Mars would make, how many rotations Mercury would make, and so on and so forth. So that was the original astronomy purpose for that number. It's a huge number. We talk in terms of millions and billions. What is the revenue of some big business multinational company? We use the billions because that's easy, right? The same thing. But over time, and I don't know the answer to that question, actually, when that number was taken and that was turned, and we started thinking, or somewhere it came in Puranas and whatnot, that that is actually the duration of something called Kali Yuga, the bad time, and so on. So that's, I just wanted to give you the first definition. That's where the origin of 432,000. And then we can talk about other definitions of Yuga.
You made 2 points, and I think people are already ringing right now. So now, coming back to the question of this cycle, which you very nicely put it up: 1, 2, 3, 4 multiplication. Now, in the Western theology, there is no such thing. Western
Hmm.
philosophy, there is no such thing because they work on the Gregorian calendar, or mostly sun-based calendar. Mostly we follow the lunar calendar.
Hmm.
So this calculation of yoga, do you think it is influenced by the lunar movements or the solar movements?
Okay, great question. So remember that 432,000 number refers to the solar, I mean, the movement, the rotations of the sun around the earth. That's the reference point. For our astronomy and for everything that we can see from the earth, let's say, the reference point is the sun. Okay, so that sun's orbit is the reference point, and around which we, that defines the year, right? That defines the day. If you think of it, when sun rises, the day begins in the Indian astronomy or Indian calendar system. When sun sets, the day is over. That was the definition of the day, like a 12 hour, the daylight. If you wanted to consider 24-hour approximately, then it was from one sunrise to the next sunrise. So sun was so important, crucial for the calendar. Now, where moon came into the picture, is sun was used for a year, like in terms of a definition of a day and a year, and moon was used to stamp the individual day based on its nakshatra, and also the tithi, the phase, and so on. So moon was used for a daily calculation, so to say, like to keep track of what has passed, just like we use Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But do you know something? The origin of the days, if you go around right now, you can go to Wikipedia and look for the days. You will find the day sequence is same everywhere in all languages. Okay, so it must have some common origin.
Some common.
Now, yeah, now let us say we don't know where that origin is, okay, and we start tracing back the history of the days of the week, their specific sequence. You know what you will find? Right now, at least based on the available evidence, the only place where you find a logical and astronomy based explanation for the sequence of the days is India. Two texts, Surya Siddhanta and Aryabhatiya, the two texts that I mentioned. And in fact, in my second book, the historic Rama, I just put that as appendix. It has nothing to do with the Ramayana per se, but I had to put it somewhere. I have, I think, called it the origin of the weekday names. And I'll not go into that detail, but maybe we can do it some other time. But there is a very logical astronomical explanation for it. So back to answering your question, sun is the reference point, and that's why it is used. But the duration of time is only one of the definition of yuga. Okay, it's not the whole and thing. I mean, there are psychological definitions of a yuga. There are administrative, like the karma based definitions of a yuga, and psychology based. So it is not only just the duration of a time. By the way, quickly, not to take your time, but just besides this 432,000 years, we must know that in Indian system there are 30-40 different definitions, where 1 year you can have all 4 yugas. 5 year is a very common definition of a yuga, and then there are 1,000. Mahabharata text has 6 different definitions of a yuga, and they don't agree necessarily with each other, because so we can speculate that they were developed for certain specific purpose, and maybe that purpose is lost now. Now we do know why 432,000, but we don't know why 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years and so on.
No, I think my limited knowledge on this subject is, there is one yuga as per Brahma, because as per his cycle, he has 1,000 cycles of 4 yuga.
Correct.
14 manvantara, 14 manus are there, and then each manu has 72 or 73, 71 or 72 yuga between them.
Right.
And like that, we are now in the Vyavasvat manu period. And then
Yes.
Katusha will come and Cholochisha will come. All this information is there.
Right.
Now, the for us, yoga is very important, and primarily for only 2 reasons. One is to develop more faith in Ram. Another is more to develop more faith in Krishna. That's the only 2 purposes, because that's what is challenged by the colonial powers. And that's why only these 2 personalities are more important right now, because in our current stage of human history, because the 2 widely read texts are the Ramayana and Mahabharata. So only these 2 dates matter most to everybody.
Right.
So when people say, we had a lot of discussions on Bhagwan Ram ruled for 11,000 years, and Dashrath Maharaj ruled for 36,000 years. As a lot of calculations are there, and which is ridiculously large number. And
Correct.
if you look at the dates over there, like Mahapuran says, Bhagavad Puran says that from the time of the birth of Parikshit to the appearance of Nanda, 1,150 human years have passed. Manushya
Mm.
versions.
Mhm.
So that gives directly the time frame of Kalki.
Mhm.
Sorry, Buddha. Buddha
Mhm.
came right after Nanda, Chandragupta, then Buddha came.
Mhm.
This is Shunga dynasty is where the Buddha appeared, and Kali Yuga also, Bhagavad Puran also explains that.
Mhm.
Now, for the most of the people who are not read over here, any of them, if you say that Treta Yuga is just 12,000 years back,
Mhm.
13,000 years back, then the whole Bhagwan Ram ruled for 11,000 years written by Valmiki
Right.
goes out of the window.
Yeah.
So that means the Ram was ruling until now, and which is not true because Krishna refers to Ram's story as in the past, previous.
Correct.
Krishna
Correct.
himself refers to that story. So
Mhm.
that's where the confusion comes for. So how do you
Right.
answer that?
Okay, no, great question. So, I mean, there is a 70, 60,000 years of Dashratha at one point, 77,000-year-old Dashratha, 11,000. I mean, okay, so how do we understand this? I think we might have addressed that in other episodes, but here is what it is. In a given text, so if you just take Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana, only limiting to Valmiki Ramayana, what you find sometime is that you have contradictory narrations. Okay, and so why did that happen? Well, there are well-known errors. That there is a translation error, transposition error, transcription error. Like, somewhere just somebody writes 11, and now say, so it may be, say for example, the Rama Bhagwan Ram might have just ruled for a certain time, but once this whole yuga system came into being, and the 432,000 and those many millions of years, then it might have got superimposed on it. So for example, something like 11 can become 11,000. For example, there is a statement in our Vedic literature which says ahoratra samvatsara. In certain contexts, a day is to be taken as equivalent to a year. Ahoratra samvatsara. It's a very definition. Now, in what context they took, we don't know. I mean, so it was used in some context. Now, some other researcher, for example, Dr. P.V. Vartak, just to try to make sense out of that 11,000, and he came up with a different date, but to make a sense out of that 11,000, he said, what if we take this definition of ahoratra samvatsara, meaning one day is equal to a year? And you find a lot of references. You find that references in Mahabharata also. In fact, Bhima, after spending like approximately 12 months in the Vanavas, after they were left, they were asked to go in the Vanavas. Do you know what he says? He says there is also a Shastric injunction which says that in a certain circumstances, a month can be considered as same as a year. And so we have already spent 13 months. Let's go and get rid of the Kauravas, get rid of the Duryodhana and reestablish ourselves. So you see this different definition. So what Vartak did, Dr. Vartak did, he said Ahoratra Samvatsara, he took that 11,000 years and turned that into 11,000 days divided by 365. It approximately comes to 30 years. So he said maybe Bhagwan Ram, after coming back, to Ayodhya, ruled for 30 years. So these will be all different interpretation, but let me make a quick point of this. Now, this is a statement in the Ramayana. Somebody else is using another definition. We are interpreting and trying to make sense out of it. Therefore, precisely for that reason, and this problem happens everywhere, precisely for that reason, we should look for empirical objective proofs as much as we can. That is not to discount any other means of pramana or proof. So, for example, this morning I was listening to Professor C.K. Raju, where he talked about the normal reasoning versus formal reasoning. And that is a formal reasoning is the effect of colonialism, by the way. The normal reasoning, which is the Indian method of pratyaksha anumana, which means there has to be a evidence based. Shankaracharya says that, Krishna says that in a Bhagavad Puran. Okay, Shruti Pratyaksham Aitiyam Anumanam Chatushtayam. You need to quadrangulate. But formal reasoning is someone can speculate and keep on going on that, and that is not very useful. But unfortunately, that is how our history was written in last 300 years.
No, you're very right. The people who have written the history have expressed their own interpretation.
Huh.
And when you work on the interpretations and the interpretation on the interpretation, then everything goes south.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you play the small game in a small circle you make and say something in somebody's ears, in right there in 5 minutes the message gets distorted by the time it reaches the 10th year.
Correct.
And so and which happens in a small house game. What to speak of when we're talking about the years and years of history?
Absolutely.
And then
Ab-
so there the Pratyaksha Praman, Shabda Praman, and Anuman Praman, all these things have their more relevance over there because we have to correlate. And I must tell the viewers also that this is the way you actually do bhaja. Bhaja is
Hmm.
a very Sanskrit dhatu,
Hmm.
and when you want to do bhajan of your Ishtadev, then you do this way, or worshipping and some worshipping of. Now coming back to the point that you made, and you quoted C.K. Raju, I hear him a lot, and you quoted Mr. Dr. Pravartak, that also I have seen his videos, couple of videos. So what do, like in your analysis, you have taken a totally new way, which is unique.
Mhm. Hmm.
Nobody has done what you are doing. And so in that way, how do you, we have spoken in the first video also, but what is your estimation? And then what is the methodology, which people would like to know more in detail? That's what we will ask us last question.
Right, right. Okay. So quickly to summarize, so what the method, the approach that I have taken is essentially the approach of Indian darshanas.
Correct.
Okay, and so to separate, the many times darshana is translated as a philosophy, but actually there is a difference. For example, Bhagavad Gita has a 13th chapter, has a shlok which says adhyatma, right, adhyatma jnana nityatvam
Good.
tattva jnanartha darshanam. So you use the darshan as a tool. You use it to understand philosophy, understand tatvajnana. Okay,
Correct.
like understand the truth, understand the true meaning, and so on. So in simple format, like if you take a Nyaya Darshana, for example, this is Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Shabda, Pramanami. So the most sophisticated modern science methodology that we call is like Karl Popper. Sir Karl Popper says it's a triangulation of explanation, prediction, and testing in the context of a theory, in the context of a background knowledge. Background knowledge is agama. So I would say if we use that method, look at say Ramayana, look at Mahabharata, look at Rigveda, look at Bhagavad Puran, Vishnu Puran, whatever we want to look at, Sushruta Samhita, Sushruta Samhita, Surya Siddhanta, Arya Bhatia, right now I'm working on it. So we can apply to it, and what I find, for example, based on the evidence, it is something that should be amenable to normal reasoning. What that means is empirical proof. So if I find something, and if you follow my recipe and you follow the verse from Mahabharata or Ramayana, you should able to get the same answer, at least similar answer. And when we start putting together as a jigsaw puzzle, it leads us to those specific dates. Now, to just quickly last point on how we connect that with the yuga. And the way we have to connect that with the yuga is, for a minute, we have to keep away this yuga business. That is how the approach I have used. So I said, now the whole Ramayana, like a huge, significant, rich evidence is telling me 12,209 BC, 600 plus pieces of evidence. In case of Mahabharata, it's giving me 300 plus pieces of evidence, taking me to 5561 BCE. Once we do that, now we should come back and say, okay, I know that the description says Mahabharata in Dwapara, or at the verge of what you call intersection of Dwapara and Kali. Then the Ramayana is at the Treta. Now start understanding what definition they might have used for a Dwapara, or what definition they might have used for a Treta Yuga. We definitely know that they did not had these 432,000 years of definition in their mind. Not for Mahabharata. The definition exists. So just like you said, Brahma and Manvantara, yeah, probably that tells us how old is this current universe, like going to 13 billion years and whatnot. But for this, there are small yugas, right? So the 13,000 years ago or 7,000 years ago, there has to be some different definition of a yuga. I don't know what it is, but what I do know is that the evidence from these epics is definitely taking us, and not just astronomy evidence from like 10 plus different fields, like geology, rivers, mountains, geography, agriculture, name it. genetics, it's taking us to that specific time period. So it is a subject, I would say. I mean, let's not dismiss it saying that we have figured it out. We have not figured out how the yuga works, but that is something we can work on. But let's go from what we feel very confident, which is the dating, to what definition of yuga they might have used.
You brought a very good point about the dating, and KK Mohammed has repeatedly said that the dating is not efficient or effective more than 4,000 years or 3,000 years. It's not effective
Hmm.
because the carbon component diminishes.
Yeah.
It is not worth testable also.
Right. I mean, they can go up to 50,000 in principle. In principle, they can go with carbon dating, but even not more than that. And frankly, you'll find there are enough evidence in our literature that we can go back. I mean, you talk Brahma, but even if you don't go Brahma, there is a Toba explosion, and you can see the allusions to that description of Toba explosion in our literature. So we can talk about that some other time. There is some reference to Mahabharata. We don't know if it's a Toba or some other one, but I like to think it could be Toba. We will never know for sure.
No, it's a very good point. Like a lot of things we cannot uh, explain, and sometimes that's why most of the scientific people say the message is more important than the dates. But
Huh.
sometimes it's a reverse way true also, because some people's faith is dependent on the numbers,
Right.
and then that's where the faith comes from. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I was going to say those people who, and I get this all the time since I'm in this dating business. They say, well, to me, it doesn't matter. Even they will tell me that it should not matter to me, that, it's only the message that is important. And I'm saying this is where the problem is, that also. For example, I understand the importance of message and I understand the importance of dating. If they only understand the importance of message, I have no problem with them. But if they start coming and telling me that the date doesn't matter, then there is a problem. And I'll tell you what the problem is. The colonial powers, when they were ruling India, okay, they have created this brainwashing in the minds of India, I mean, Indian psyche, I would say, that India doesn't have its history, whereas they do. And I would say it's exactly the opposite.
Opposite.
The Marathi saying it's Soracha Ulta Bombar. I don't know what the Hindi they say, like, the accuser, the person who is actually guilty is accusing the other party. And so that is a brainwashing of some 300 plus years. That also makes us, I mean, the professors know the same thing. That's what they teach their students. The student becomes professor. And that's why we hear even from academics like, oh, no, we don't need to worry about the dating. But dating comes everywhere. I mean, I'm not saying dating is the only thing, but dating gives you the context for understanding everything else, including the message. Because to appreciate the greatness of a message, you need to know when that message came into being.
No, I totally agree with you. See, the Ram Setu
Huh.
has been the basis of faith of many millions, if not all.
Mhm.
Some people they have blind faith on Valmiki Ramayana, and we also have. But some people's faith has come just because of Ram Setu.
Mhm.
Some people's faith has just come from Dwarka.
Yeah.
Now Dwarka, Ram Setu, Chitrakoot, Ayodhya, places are still there with the same names.
Right.
So if some people say they can disconnect from the earthly reality and live in the scriptural world, that is also incomplete. That is incomplete also,
Yeah.
because you need to have both. Earth, Vyasdev is very clear on that. Vyasdev says,
Ah.
Vyasdev actually is very clear. Vyasdev Mahabharat says that the history of the land defines your faith.
Yes.
You cannot leave
Absolutely.
the land.
Right.
You know,
And that's where the colonial powers did a good job. Again, this morning when I was listening to Professor Raju, CK Raju, and on the sidelines we were making comments, and this thing came. In fact, he was talking about the Euclid, and absolutely no verifiable empirical evidence for the existence of Euclid. Okay, and then someone made a comment about Jesus. I think it was Jonathan Crabtree. Who was working on that zero and all that. And he said, well, just like a similar discussion to Jesus, there are no contemporary accounts of either Euclid or Jesus. I think that was his point. And I said, now let's look at the scenario. There are no contemporary accounts of, say, Euclid or Jesus, and still they both are accepted as a historical personality because these guys told us. And now let's go quickly for a minute to Ramayana and Mahabharata, where there are contemporary accounts. Valmiki's accounts of Rama are contemporary accounts. Vyasa's accounts of Krishna and Pandavas and everyone are contemporary. And we have been brainwashed, at least for 300, 400 years, that these are fiction and not real itihas or history. So just imagine how much twisted and how much twisting and torturing that is been done, and many of us have internalized that. So when somebody like me talks about this as a history or why it needs to be done in this way, people start saying, "What are you doing? Nobody has done that." And I say, "That's precisely my point. Nobody has done it before."
Exactly. No, I think that's why we coined the term Sattology, because mythology is something which is an accusation, not even a description.
Mhm.
And so Sattology becomes a description a little bit. There's a truth. Now, coming back to many of the Americans who are watching, and some of you may be wondering that why we focus on Indian history too so much. My answer to them, and I want to ask, have you answered that? And but before that, I'll just put a framework to that. My history is that my theory is that the first of all, I come from originally from India,
Mhm.
Sholapur, Maharashtra.
Mhm.
But the importance is that it's the only ancient history that has a positive message for the humanity, and the principles have stood ground, never changed, not modified. Even the Bhagavad Gita is never modified. There are interpretations by everybody, everyone else, and it is the only culture which is most critically analyzed. Bible has not been analyzed, Old Testament has not been analyzed, and Quran, forget about it. So over to you, Nilesh.
Okay, so I would say in case of Bible, I mean, you see a lot of research being done. Okay, but the research, I mean, so that's actually true. That the lot of research. I mean, the same Bible, so many universities, theology departments, divinity departments are doing it, but it is done in that divinity context. The framework is already given. Well, there are some exceptional studies. Now, coming back to importance of Indian civilization, or why we put so much emphasis, because as far as the preservation is concerned, so if you want to truly know about the past, okay, what you find, if you go around the world, you find archaeological evidence. Like just now there was a Clovis, pre-Clovis evidence, from Oregon, a cave in Oregon. Just now, the paper came out 2 days ago. Or if you go to South America, there is a footprints of human beings going back to 33,000 BC, and it's all great. I mean, that's great. You go to Turkey, you go up to 12,000 BC. You go to Indonesia, Gunpadang, like 22,000 BC. Japan and Ecuador connections going back to Hamon pottery, like 12,000 BC, and so on. So there are these references, but practically no linguistic records. Practically no linguistic records. So all you are left with is some sample or some fossil, and then you are trying to make sense out of what they might be doing. That is not a guesswork in case of India, and we are lucky. I mean, we don't know how much has been burned by the Islamic invasion and the libraries and what we have lost. However, whatever little that is preserved is actually still a lot. Like my friend Jeffrey Armstrong says, if the all the other, say, Abrahamic religions, they can be called the religion of the book, then he says Sanatana Vedic Dharma is a religion of a library, if we can use the word religion, although that's not the appropriate word. It's a religion of a library. So even whatever that has survived has got so much into it. And once you date it, what does that mean? It is the story of our humanity. I mean, just because it happened in India, and frankly, it didn't happen in India. If you go to Ramayana, you find the references all the way to Chile and Peru, maybe the westward too, and maybe the northward. Same thing with the Mahabharata, maybe not that far, but it is the history of the world, and that is the only surviving record, so to say. I think that's the importance of it. Besides what you said, besides what you brought up, that spiritual dimension, the Adhyatmic dimension that you brought, the wisdom that is preserved, but even from a purely historical and geographical and the history of humanity, I think it is the only remaining evidence that we need to really preserve and study and understand.
And I think that's the reason why Aryan invasion theory has been totally debunked.
Hmm.
I mean, as if like it was a total fake story. And I
Yeah.
think many other authors on this show have come and debunked it in a very scientific way, just by understanding the Google trend maps,
Right.
and see when the actually the Aryan invasion theory was invented,
Yeah.
right after the 1857 mutiny in India.
Yes.
So many of these theories have been invented for political subjugation or intellectual and cultural subjugation of the followers of this culture.
Yeah.
Now, my last question to you before we all
Okay.
end, and we will come back again with another exciting show. We are every Friday there, so viewers keep watching every Friday, and one of these days we'll make it live as well across YouTube. So, one last question to you is that when people talk about renaming the old historical places, like for example
Hmm.
Ram Setu, Nal Setu,
Hmm.
has been like culturally they have tried to control it. The Wikipedia and the academic institutions calling it Adams Bridge,
Hmm.
which is a British name given to the old bridge.
Hmm.
Uh, so how, does that impact the any kind of timelines or anything which you say of in your own works?
Okay, yeah, it does, and maybe we should. I mean, I'll just briefly mention. We should take that possibly another time. I mean, if you remember, and I will also make a note. Like Ravana's Lanka, that could be our topic, for example. Okay,
Yes.
and I'll give you some of the exciting research that is coming up. But something quickly I wanted to say, like you said, there are many people came on this show and already have talked about the nonsense of Aryan invasion from various perspectives, from different disciplines of science. I think what you need to do is identify few wonderful comedians and bring them to the show, and they need to start, making fun of this Aryan invasion nonsense. Just to, because it's there. I mean, the evidence that is gone. It's just poof. It's just gone. But more we talk about it, what I notice is it seems to get more stronger in the sense of in people's psyche. Oh, so that Aryan invasion, everywhere the thing is being discussed as Aryan invasion. Well, the reality, what is discussed is Aryan invasion is a nonsense, but people only remember Aryan invasion being discussed. So you need to bring some comedians. I think that will do that. But the changing the name, or exactly what does the Nala Setu means, how it was built, possibly where it is or where it was, and where is the Ravana's Lanka. I mean, that could be a very controversial and exciting subject, and that needs its own episode. So
Exactly.
we can do one of this time. Ravana's Lanka is an easy way to remember it.
I
And
think next week we should
okay,
do Ravan's Lanka.
Ravana's Lanka. Yeah.
And the Mandar mountain jump of Hanuman gives that clue where
Hmm.
it exactly was, and I think people will be very surprised.
Yes, Mahindra. Yeah, Mahindragiri. From Mahindragiri, he's jumping. Very good.
Because
Yes.
100 yojana, that calculation,
Yes.
it can baffle many people. It's
Right.
800 kilometers or 800 miles, whatever you calculate it. Anyway, thank you, Nilesh ji. As
Thank
usual,
you.
a wonderful conversation. And I have more than 50 questions, but viewers, we do not have time. But next Friday, same time, 10 a.m. PST, please join. And also you can comment. We'll try to make it live on YouTube. You can comment directly on the YouTube. But for viewers who watched directly on the links on the cell phones, so thank you all for joining.